The Brooklyn Dodgers were an American baseball team that was active in the major leagues from 1884 until 1957, after which it moved to Los Angeles, where it continued its history as the Los Angeles Dodgers. The team's name derived from the reputed skill of Brooklyn residents at evading the city's trolley streetcar network. The Dodgers played in two stadiums in South Brooklyn, each named Washington Park, and at Eastern Park in the neighborhood of Brownsville before moving to Ebbets Field in the neighborhood of Flatbush in 1913. The team is noted for signing Jackie Robinson in 1947 as the first black player in the modern major leagues. Early Brooklyn baseball. Brooklyn was home to numerous baseball clubs in the mid-1850s. 8 of 16 participants in the first convention were from Brooklyn, including the Atlantic, Eckford, and Excelsior clubs that combined to dominate play for most of the 1860s. Brooklyn helped make baseball commercial, as the locale of the first paid admission games, a series of 3 all-star contests matching New York and Brooklyn in 1858. Brooklyn also featured the first 2 enclosed baseball grounds, the Union Grounds and the Capitoline Grounds. Enclosed, dedicated ballparks accelerated the evolution from amateurism to professionalism. Despite the early success of Brooklyn clubs in the National Association of Baseball Players, officially amateur until 1869, they fielded weak teams in the succeeding National Association of Professional Baseball Players, the first professional league formed in 1871. The Excelsiors no longer challenged for the amateur championship after the Civil War and never entered the professional NA. The Eckfords and Atlantics declined to join until 1872 and thereby lost their best players. The Eckfords survived only 1 season and the Atlantics 4, with losing teams. The National League replaced the NA in 1876 and granted exclusive territories to its 8 members, excluding the Atlantics in favor of the New York Mutuals who had shared home grounds with the Atlantics. When the Mutuals were expelled by the league, the Hartford Dark Blues Club moved in, changed its name to the Brooklyn Hartfords and played its home games at Union Grounds in 1877 before disbanding. The origin of the Dodgers. The team currently known as the Dodgers was formed in 1883 by real estate magnate and baseball enthusiast Charles Byrne, who convinced his brother-in-law Joseph Doyle and casino operator Ferdinand Abel to start the team with him. Byrne set up a grandstand on Fifth Avenue and named it Washington Park in honor of George Washington. The Brooklyn Grays played in the minor Interstate Association of Professional Baseball Clubs that first season. Doyle became the first team manager, and they drew 6,000 fans to their first home game on May 12, 1883 against the Trenton team. The Grays won the league title after the Camden Merit Club disbanded on July 20 and Brooklyn picked up some of its better players. The Grays were invited to join the American Association for the 1884 season. After winning the American Association's league championship in 1889, the Grays moved to the National League and won the 1890 NL Championship, the only major league team to win consecutive championships in both professional baseball leagues. They lost the 1889 World Series to the New York Giants and tied the 1890 World Series with the Louisville Colonels. Their success during this period was partly attributed to their having absorbed skilled players from the defunct New York Metropolitans and Brooklyn Wards Wonders. In 1899, the Grays merged with the Baltimore Orioles, as Baltimore manager Ned Hanlon became the club's new manager and Charles Ebbets became the primary team owner. The team's nickname. The team name, Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers, was coined in 1895. The nickname was still new enough in September 1895 that a newspaper could report that, Trolley Dodgers is the new name which Eastern baseball cranks, fans have given the Brooklyn club. In 1895, Brooklyn played at Eastern Park, where they had moved early in the 1891 season when the second Washington Park burned down. Some sources erroneously report that the name, Trolley Dodgers, referred to pedestrians avoiding fast cars on streetcar tracks that bordered Eastern Park on 2 sides. Eastern Park, however, was not bordered by street-level trolley lines that would have been dodged by pedestrians. Eastern Park was served directly only by an elevated railway. The name, Trolley Dodgers, implied the dangers posed by trolley cars in Brooklyn generally, which had recently been switched from being horse-powered to the much faster electrical power. The name was soon shortened to Brooklyn Dodgers. Other team names used by the franchise that would finally be called the Dodgers were the Grays, the Grooms, the Bridegrooms, the Superbas and the Robins. All of these nicknames were used by fans and newspaper sports writers to describe the team, but not in any official capacity. The team's legal name was the Brooklyn Baseball Club. However, the Trolley Dodgers nickname was used throughout this period by fans and sports writers of the day. The team did not use the name in any formal sense until 1932, when the word Dodgers appeared on team jerseys. The conclusive shift came in 1933, when both home and road jerseys for the team bore the name Dodgers. Examples of how the many popularized names of the team were used interchangeably are available from newspaper articles from the period before 1932. A New York Times article describing a game the Dodgers played in 1916 starts out by referring to how Jimmy Callahan, pilot of the Pirates, did his best to wreck the hopes the Dodgers have of gaining the National League pennant, but then goes on to comment, "The only thing that saved the Superbas from being toppled from first place was that the Phillies lost one of the 2 games played." Most baseball statistics sites and baseball historians generally now refer to the pennant-winning 1916 Brooklyn team as the Robins. A 1918 New York Times article does use the nickname Robins in its title Buccaneers Take Last from Robins, but the subtitle of the article reads Subdue the Superbas by 11-4, making series an even break. Another example of the interchangeability of the different nicknames is found on the program issued at Ebbets Field for the 1920 World Series, which identifies the matchup in the series as Dodgers vs. Indians, despite the fact that the Robins nickname had been in consistent usage at this point for around 6 years. Rivalry with the Giants. The historic and heated rivalry between the Dodgers and the Giants is more than a century old. It began when the Dodgers and Giants faced each other in the 1889 World Series, the ancestor of the Subway Series, and both played in separate cities. When both franchises moved to California after the 1957 season, the rivalry was easily transplanted, as the cities of Los Angeles and San Francisco have long been rivals in economics, culture, and politics. Uncle Robbie and the Daffiness Boys manager Wilbert Robinson, another former Oriole, popularly known as a Uncle Robbie, restored the Brooklyn team to respectability. His Brooklyn Robins reached a 1916 and 1920 World Series, losing both, but contending perennially for several seasons. Charles Ebbets and Ed McKeever died within a week of each other in 1925, and Robbie was named president while still field manager. Upon assuming the title of president, however, Robine saw an unregistered trademark's ability to focus on the field declined, and the teams of the late 1920s were often fondly referred to as the Daffiness Boys for their distracted, error-ridden style of play. Outfielder Babe Herman was the leader both in hitting and in zaniness. The signature Dodger play from this era occurred when 3 players Dazzy Vance, Chick Fuster, and Hermani all ended up at third base at the same time. After his removal as club president, Robinson returned to managing, and the club unregistered trademark's performance rebounded somewhat. When Robinson retired in 1931, he was replaced as manager by Max Carey. Although some suggested renaming the Robins the Brooklyn Canaries, after Carey, the name Brooklyn Dodgers returned to stay following Robinson's retirement. It was during this era that Willard Mullin, a noted sports cartoonist, fixed the Brooklyn team with the lovable nickname of Dem Bums. After hearing his cab driver ask, "So how did those bums do today?" Mullin decided to sketch an exaggerated version of famed circus clown Emmett Kelly to represent the Dodgers in his much-praised cartoons in the New York World Telegram. Both image and nickname caught on, so much so that many a Dodger yearbook cover, from 1951 through 1957, featured a Willard Mullin illustration of the Brooklyn Bum. Perhaps the highlight of the Daffiness Boys era came after Wilbert Robinson left the dugout. In 1934, Giants player-manager Bill Terry was asked about the Dodgers' unregistered trademark chances in the coming pennant race and cracked infamously, "Is Brooklyn still in the league?" Managed now by Casey Stengel, the 1934 Dodgers were determined to make their presence felt. As it happened, the season entered its final games with the Giants tied with the St. Louis Cardinals for the pennant, with the Giants' unregistered trademark remaining games against the Dodgers. Stengel led his bums to the Polo Grounds for the showdown, and they beat the Giants twice to knock them out of the pennant race. The Gorsehouse Gang Cardinals nailed the pennant by beating the Cincinnati Reds those same 2 days. One key development during this era was the 1938 appointment of Leland Larry MacPhail as Dodgers general manager. MacPhail, who brought night baseball to MLB as general manager of the Reds, also introduced Brooklyn to night baseball and ordered the successful refurbishing of Ebbets Field. He also brought Reds voice Red Barber to Brooklyn as the Dodgers lead announcer in 1939, just after MacPhail broke the New York Baseball Executives' agreement to ban live baseball broadcasts, enacted because of the fear of what effect the radio calls would have on the home team's attendance. MacPhail remained with the Dodgers until 1942, when he returned to the armed forces for World War II. He later became one of the Yankees' co-owners, bidding unsuccessfully for Barber to join him in the Bronx as announcer. The first Major League Baseball game to be televised was Brooklyn's 6-1 victory over Cincinnati at Ebbets Field on August 26, 1939. Batting helmets were introduced to Major League Baseball by the Dodgers in 1941. Breaking the color barrier. For most of the first half of the 20th century, no Major League Baseball team employed a black player. A parallel system of Negro leagues developed, but most of the Negro League players were denied a chance to prove their skill before a national audience. Jackie Robinson became the first African American to play Major League Baseball in the 20th century when he played his first Major League game on April 15, 1947 as a member of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Robinson's entry into the league was mainly due to general manager Branch Rickey's efforts. The deeply religious Rickey's motivation appears to have been primarily moral, although business considerations were also present. Rickey was a member of the Methodist Church, the antecedent denomination to the United Methodist Church of today, which was a strong advocate for social justice and active later in the civil rights movement. Besides selecting Robinson for his exceptional baseball skills, Rickey also considered Robinson's outstanding personal character, his UCLA education and rank of captain in the Army in his decision, since he knew that boos, taunts, and criticism would be directed at Robinson and that Robinson would have to be tough enough to withstand this abuse without attempting to retaliate. The inclusion of Robinson on the team also led the Dodgers to move its spring training site. Prior to 1946, the Dodgers held their spring training in Jacksonville, Florida. However, the city's stadium refused to host an exhibition game with the Montreal Royals the Dodgers unregistered trademark-owned farm club on whose roster Robinson appeared at the time, citing segregation laws. Nearby Sanford similarly declined. Ultimately, City Island Ballpark in Daytona Beach agreed to host the game with Robinson on the field. The team would travel to Havana, Cuba for spring training in 1947, this time with Robinson on the big club. Although the Dodgers ultimately built Dodgertown and its Holman Stadium further south in Vero Beach, and played there for 61 spring training seasons from 1948 through 2008, Daytona Beach would rename City Island Ballpark to Jackie Robinson Ballpark in his honor. This event was the continuation of the integration of professional sports in the United States, with professional football having led the way in 1946, with the concomitant demise of the Negro Leagues, and is regarded as a key moment in the history of the American civil rights movement. Robinson was an exceptional player, a speedy runner who sparked the team with his intensity. He was the inaugural recipient of the Rookie of the Year award, which is now named the Jackie Robinson Award in his honor. The Dodgers' willingness to integrate, when most other teams refused to, was a key factor in their 1947-1956 success. They won 6 pennants in those 10 years with the help of Robinson, 3-time MVP Roy Campanella, Cy Young Award winner Don Newcombe, Jim Gilliam, and Joe Black. Robinson would eventually go on to become the first African American elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962. we wait unregistered trademark till next year. After the wilderness years of the 1920s and 1930s, the Dodgers were rebuilt into a contending club first by general manager Larry MacPhail and then the legendary Branch Rickey. Led by Jackie Robinson, Pee Wee Reese, and Gil Hodges in the infield, Duke Snider and Carl Furillo in the outfield, Roy Campanella behind the plate, and Don Newcombe, Carl Erskine, and Preacher Rowe on the pitcher's mound, the Dodgers won pennants in 1941, 1947, 1949, 1952, and 1953, only to fall to the New York Yankees in all 5 of the subsequent World Series. The annual ritual of building excitement, followed in the end by disappointment, became a common pattern to the long-suffering fans, and wait unregistered trademark till next year became an unofficial Dodgers slogan. While the Dodgers generally enjoyed success during this period, in 1951 they fell victim to one of the largest collapses in the history of baseball. On August 11, 1951, Brooklyn led the National League by an enormous 13-1/2 games over their arch-rivals, the Giants. While the Dodgers went 26-22 from that time until the end of the season, the Giants went on an absolute tear, winning an amazing 37 of their last 44 games, including their last 7 in a row. At the end of the season the Dodgers and the Giants were tied for first place, forcing a 3-game playoff for the pennant. The Giants took Game 1 by a score of 3-1 before being shut out by the Dodgers' Clem Labine in Game 2, 10-0. It all came down to the final game, and Brooklyn seemed to have the pennant locked up, holding a 4-2 lead in the bottom of the 9th inning. Giants outfielder Bobby Thompson, however, hit a stunning 3-run walk-off home run off the Dodgers' Ralph Branca to secure the NL championship for New York. To this day Thompson's home run is known as the shot heard round the world. In 1955, by which time the core of the Dodger team was beginning to age, next year finally came. The fabled Boys of Summer shot down the Bronx Bombers in 7 games, led by the first-class pitching of young left-hander Johnny Poders, whose key pitch was a change-up known as pulling down the lampshade, because of the arm motion used right when the ball was released. Poders won 2 series games, including the deciding 7th. The turning point of Game 7 was a spectacular double play that began with left fielder Sandy Amorose running down Yogi Berra unregistered trademark S-long fly ball, then throwing to shortstop Pee Wee Reese, who doubled up a surprised Gil McDougald at first base to preserve the Dodger lead. The Dodgers won 2-0. Although the Dodgers lost the World Series to the Yankees in 1956, it hardly seemed to matter. Brooklyn fans had their memory of triumph, and soon that would be all they were left with, a victory that decades later would be remembered in the Billy Joel single We Didn't Start the Fire, which included the line, "Brooklyn's got a winning team." Moved to California, real estate businessman Walter O'Malley had acquired majority ownership of the Dodgers in 1950, when he bought the shares of team co-owners Branch Rickey and the estate of the late John L. Smith. Before long O'Malley was working to buy new land in Brooklyn for a new, more accessible and better arrayed ballpark than Ebbets Field. Beloved as it was, Ebbets Field had grown old and was not well served by fan infrastructure, to the point where the Dodgers could not sell out the park even in the heat of a pennant race. New York City construction coordinator Robert Moses, however, sought to force O'Malley into using a site in Flushing Meadows, Queens, the eventual location of Shea Stadium. Moses's vision involved a city-built, city-owned park, which was greatly at odds with O'Malley's real estate savvy. When O'Malley realized that he would not be allowed to buy a suitable parcel of land in Brooklyn, he began thinking of team relocation. O'Malley was free to purchase land of his own choosing but wanted Robert Moses to condemn land along the Atlantic Railroad yards in downtown Brooklyn under Title I authority. Title I gave the city municipality power to condemn land for the purpose of building what it calls public purpose projects. Moses's interpretation of public purpose included public parks, public housing and public highways and bridges. What O'Malley wanted was for Moses to use Title I authority, rather than to pay market value for the land. With Title I the city via Robert Moses could have sold the land to O'Malley at a below-market price. Moses refused to honor O'Malley's request and responded, "If you want the land so bad, why don't you purchase it with your own money?" Meanwhile, non-stop transcontinental airline travel had become routine during the years since the Second World War, and teams were no longer bound by much slower railroad timetables. Because of civil aviation advances, it became possible to locate teams farther apart as far west as California while maintaining the same busy game schedules. When Los Angeles officials attended the 1956 World Series looking to entice a team to move to the City of Angels, they were not even thinking of the Dodgers. Their original target had been the Washington Senators. At the same time, O'Malley was looking for a contingency in case Moses and other New York politicians refused to let him build the Brooklyn stadium he wanted, and sent word to the Los Angeles officials that he was interested in talking. Los Angeles offered him what New York would not, a chance to buy land suitable for building a ballpark, and own that ballpark, giving him complete control over all its revenue streams. Meanwhile, Giants owner Horace Stanaeum was having similar difficulty finding a replacement for his team's antiquated home stadium, the Polo Grounds. Stanaeum was considering moving the Giants to Minneapolis, but was persuaded instead to move them to San Francisco, ensuring that the Dodgers would have a National League rival closer than St. Louis. So the two arch-rival teams, the Dodgers and Giants, moved out to the West Coast together after the 1957 season. The Brooklyn Dodgers played their final game at Ebbets Field on September 24, 1957, which the Dodgers won 2-0 over the Pittsburgh Pirates. On April 18, 1958, the Los Angeles Dodgers played their first game in L.A., defeating the former New York and newly relocated and renamed San Francisco Giants, 6-5, before 78,672 fans at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. Sadly, catcher Roy Campanella, left partially paralyzed in an off-season accident, was never able to play for Los Angeles. A 2007 HBO film, Brooklyn Dodgers, The Ghosts of Flatbush, is a documentary covering the Dodgers' history from early days to the beginning of the Los Angeles era. In the film the story is related that O'Malley was so hated by Brooklyn Dodger fans, after the move to California, that it was said, if you asked a Brooklyn Dodger fan, if you had a gun with only 2 bullets in it and were in a room with Hitler, Stalin and O'Malley, who would you shoot? The answer, O'Malley, twice. References. Other reading, Unregistered trademark Agostino, Dennis. Crosby, Bonnie. Through a Blue Lens, The Brooklyn Dodgers Photographs of Barney Stein, 1937–1957. Triumph Books.